John Redmann, Power of Attorney, the show that aims to empower you through knowledge of the law. I'm Attorney John Redmann.
And hello everyone, I'm Shauna Sanford. Did you know that there are more juvenile inmates with mental health issues in Louisiana than most other states? That's the finding of a report recently released by the State Juvenile Justice Implementation Commission. On today's show, we'll focus on the very serious topic of the juvenile justice system. It works differently than the system for adults, but it can be a complicated and scary thing for many families who have to go through it.
Today we have an excellent guest, Attorney Tim Webre, who has worked for more than 2 decades in the juvenile justice system. Tim has a lot of fascinating insights into how it works, and we will speak with him in just a few moments.
Well, John, before we get to Tim, and he does have a lot of great information to share with us today, if you could, for our viewers out there, sort of help us understand the juvenile justice system juvenile justice system is much different than the system for adults.
Absolutely, and the big picture, and what viewers need to understand is when you're a child, but old enough to get into trouble with the law, you're not treated as an adult. In fact, a lot of times when you read about, God forbid, a murder, if a child, 15 years old, 14 years old, 13 years old, gets his hands on a gun, commits an armed robbery, kills somebody, the question is, should we try him as an adult or try him as a child? Children who are treated as children under law in the juvenile justice system face a different set of laws and are sent to different prisons, are treated differently. One of the things that we have tried to do under Louisiana law is reform the juvenile justice system. In 2003, a lot of changes. We're going to talk about that. It's a fascinating discussion, and it needs more work, but we'll talk.
Right, and it's had a big impact. Coming up next, Attorney Tim Webre joins the show to talk about kids and crime and what you need to know about the juvenile justice system and how it's working. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hello everyone and welcome back. Well, we've all either read the stories or seen them on the news. Kids committing crimes across the country, our state, and in our communities. And for some, it's a problem that hits too close to home. Is the juvenile justice system in Louisiana working? How does it work? Attorney Tim Webre is with us to answer those questions and many, many more.
Tim currently works as a private attorney in family law, criminal defense, and other areas. He's spent many years working with the Jefferson Parish Public Defender's Office, where he represented juveniles accused of crimes. We're happy to have you here with us, Tim, my good friend. Why don't you describe for us what is juvenile justice and paint that picture for us? What's going on with it?
10 years ago, in 2003, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act was passed. So the juvenile justice has changed drastically. If you look at the picture in 2003, Tallulah Prison was still operating. One of the things that the Reform Act did was close down Tallulah. Tallulah was the worst prison, juvenile prison in the country. The Human Rights Watch released a report of human rights violations, international human rights violations occurring at Tallulah. Children were being kept in solitary confinement. Children were being brutalized, children were being sexually abused, and children were going hungry. Tallulah was a private prison, and the corporation that ran it to save money wasn't feeding the children enough.
That's awful.
At the time, in 2000, and the figures I have are from 2000, we had 1,800 juveniles in a juvenile penitentiary in Louisiana. The recidivism rate of those children over 3 years was 85%.
Define recidivism.
They committed another crime that landed them back in prison within a 3-year period.
After they had been released.
After they'd been
served their time, they were released, and then went back
right
and
back
committed
in,
another
the revolving
crime.
door.
Yeah.
Since then, what we're looking at, the snapshot today, there are only 444 children in secured care of the 3 facilities still opened. Recidivism rate has dropped. These are the worst of the worst children. Recidivism rate over a 3-year period, the last 3-year period they can keep track of, it was down to 45%. But the figures over the past 2 years show that it's falling. Each year it's getting less and less.
So again, so when you track a child who's let out of prison, 3 years later, only 45%, although that's still kind of shocking.
That's still high.
But that's not 85%.
That's not
45%
it shows the progress
gotten into
we're
trouble again and are going back into the juvenile justice system.
And so when we look at the big picture of juvenile crime, it's safe to say that juvenile crime is actually going down here in Louisiana?
Yes. Juvenile crime rate is falling. In Jefferson Parish, there were over 8,000 crimes committed by juveniles in 2004. It's down to 3,000. That is a drastic fall off.
Yeah, yeah.
It shows that the progress we're making in Jefferson Parish, things we are doing are working.
And you directly attribute that to the Louisiana model.
The Louisiana model, the reforms that we have put in, and the reforms that Jefferson Parish itself has put in on its own.
Specifically Jefferson Parish, yeah.
Orleans Parish figures are constant, and they are, if anything, they are going down. There has been a reduction in the number of filings by the District Attorney's Office, filing of new charges. There has been a reduction of the youths that petitions have been filed against over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Let me see if I'm understanding you. You just described how there was a dramatic decrease in the number of crimes involving youths from in Jefferson Parish from 2004 up until the present time, where you mentioned 2011. In Orleans Parish, has there been a similar decrease, or you're just saying there's a downward trend?
There's a downward trend. I cannot pull up Orleans Parish's uniform crime statistic figures like I can in Jefferson. They're a little harder to find. I had to pull through the public defender's records and the Louisiana Supreme Court records. I have to thank Josh Perry for helping me with that.
Okay, well, thank you, Josh Perry.
You mentioned secured care, and I just want our viewers to be very clear about what you mean when you say secured care. When we're talking about the juvenile justice system, we don't refer to jail for juveniles, right? You're calling it secured care.
Secured care is when you are locked into a prison facility and you cannot leave.
Okay.
It is the equivalent of an adult prison.
It is, but the language changes, right?
The language changes. In juvenile, all the language changes.
All the language changes. Now, I think it's also important to point out, you look at this dramatic drop in the number of juvenile crimes. Katrina happened in 2005, yes. And some might say, well, that had to have been a big factor. But you said specifically in Jefferson Parish, if you look at the numbers, you're looking at a population that did not disperse, that was not, that actually stayed in place. So you can directly attribute the decrease in the numbers of juvenile crimes to the reform that has taken place.
Yes, Jefferson Parish, the population didn't change. It did not flood. Orleans Parish, you can't make that same argument, but Jefferson Parish didn't flood. We have the same population. And even post-Katrina, if you look at the numbers post-Katrina, after the initial lull, when all the children came back, it's been falling since then. Still, it's not one big drop. There was a big drop, but then there was a steady decline, and since then. And one of the reasons, the reasons why this is happening is the number one indicator of future criminal behavior with a juvenile is how long they stay in detention. If you put a child in jail, as much as all of our good intentions of the good reasons why we're doing it, what happens is they make new friends with the bad kids. Right. You as a parent would never do this. If your child got in trouble with another child, you wouldn't say, oh, you're gonna stay with little Johnny, you know, you broke into a car with them, y'all are going to hang out together now to figure out how to do it right. The state shouldn't do it either.
Right.
So in Jefferson Parish, we have an alternative to detention program. What will happen is if a child comes in and is arrested by the sheriff's deputy, they will go into an assessment center. They will be interviewed. A risk assessment will be made. It will be made on objective factors, not subjective factors, because we are very worried about minorities being treated differently and going to prison as opposed to a white boy just because they're a different race. So objective standards are used, and the court tries to use home incarceration, supervision by probation officers for anyone that's not a public safety risk.
What are some of those objective factors? Just to give us
the crime
an idea.
the child is accused of committing and his criminal record.
Okay.
Those are the big two things that we use.
So help us understand, when we talk about the juvenile justice system, and we mentioned earlier in the intro that it can be confusing, that it can be scary for families that have to navigate this system. What happens from the very beginning if a child does commit a crime? What happens?
Accused of committing
a crime.
Yes.
They will go to they will be interviewed by the sheriff's office. All right. If you are a parent, do not let your child give a statement without talking to a lawyer. The biggest problem that we have in juvenile law is adolescent development. Children will tell an adult what the adult wants to hear to try to get out of trouble. We have a big problem in juvenile law with false confessions. The big example is the New York Central Park jogger case, which occurred in the 90s. 4 young, I believe they were African Americans, a jogger in New York, Central Park, was beaten so badly that she had no memory of what happened and raped. She was found, I believe she's doing all right today, but she had no memory of what happened. 4 youths were arrested in the park. They gave inculpatory statements, which they say were coerced. Donald Trump put 4 New York newspapers, full-page ads calling for the return of the death penalty for juveniles. These boys were convicted, they sat in prison, and were exonerated with the new DNA technology. That they did not do it.
And these boys didn't, nobody stepped forward, or they didn't know to say, well, I should have a lawyer. They didn't have parents maybe to say, don't talk to my child. And because there was no parent or lawyer to stop the children from being interrogated, or they basically gave inculpatory, which is a fancy way of saying statements that made them appear to say they were guilty.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And so the moral of the story is, if a child is arrested, the child should be given the opportunity of having a lawyer to not make them give statements.
Correct.
And of course, on the other side of the token is, well, hold on, you're going to make law enforcement's job a whole lot harder at getting the guilty kids convicted. And what do you say to those critics?
Well, I say that juvenile confessions are worthless. There are some countries under their law, confessions are not allowed because of fear of coercion. If the police department do their job, they will have the evidence they need to convict. They should not rely on a 13-year-old being put under pressure to
without having an adult or a representative with the child, at least protecting their
Often
rights.
they will have an adult. Often they will have an adult under juvenile law. The preference is to have an adult there. It used to be mandatory. Now it's under the totality of the circumstance, which I don't think we need to get into. But
is there an age limit?
An age limit. Age of 10 can be charged with a crime and sent to prison. At the age of 17, adult jurisdiction kicks in. Age of 15, if this crime is serious, murder, rape, armed robbery, the child can be transferred.
But if the child is younger than 10, let's say it's a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old that's accused of committing some sort of crime, could that child be arrested?
The child is not going to be arrested. At that point, the child is a family in need of services. The child is, under the old law, is a child in need of supervision. But what will happen is they will be reported to the juvenile court. They might have to meet with the probation department. Services might be put into place. Mental health issues might be addressed. Therapy might be addressed. Parental supervision might be addressed.
I'm going to have to ask you to hold it right there because we have to take a break. Stay tuned. Coming up next, we're going to answer your questions, and we have lots of them. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.